Welcome to this video. My name's Hannah. I'm a horticulturalist, gardener, community gardener, forager, wild crafter. I'm really into plants, but also mushrooms. And yeah, this video is going to be about identifying wildflowers specifically. If you enjoy it, I might do ones on how to identify trees or how to identify mosses, lichen, fungi. This is just a sort of beginner's video if you want to get into learning the names of flowers, really. I'm just getting tickled by this really beautiful broom. Yeah, it's a very beautiful day today, and there are lots of flowers about. Also lots of flowers that I don't know, that I am going to learn the names of today with you. So yeah, before we start, I just want to say, be patient when you're learning plant names. Whoa, there's a little fly. Be patient with yourself when you're learning plants. It can feel like this whole super intimidating, strange world out there. But it's a beautiful thing, to not know. And also, if you can't get the hang of learning any of these plants by their names, you can make up your own names. You can make up your own sort of associations with them based on your experiences with them. A lot of common names vary across, regions of the world, really. And there are lots of different names for the same plants. For example, cleavers are also called sticky willy, or I don't know what else they're called, sticky something else. Those are the names that I know, but there are lots and lots of names for, say, one specific plant. And yeah, when you're starting to learn plant names, maybe you'll come across something that's often called a scientific name, or binomial name, or Latin name of a plant. It's made up out of two words, the genus and the species. If none of this makes sense to you, you can just skip it, or if you're not interested in learning the scientific names. I personally come from like a sort of studying botany / horticulture background, so I had to learn a lot of scientific plant names, and actually it's much more helpful than I initially thought. I felt really frustrated at learning them, but after a while I found a lot of magic in learning those names as well, because they're often rooted in some sort of descriptive thing about the plant. For example, clover is called Trifolium repens. That's a creeping clover. And yeah, trifolium means three-leaved, and repens is creeping. There are lots of these scientific names that indicate something about the plant, or they mean something. Album, for example, is white. Rubra is red or pink. I don't know, there's lots of these sort of Latin plant names that actually are really fun to learn, and they also sound a bit like spells, and they sound quite magical. So if that's something you're interested in, I will also use these names amongst common names that I'm familiar with. Also, I guess what is really handy about learning these scientific names is that they are universal, and you can say, if somebody only knows a plant name in French, there's a really beautiful fly bee just in front of me, and it's really exciting. Oh, it's really cute. Say for instance, if somebody only knows a plant name in French and you only know it in English, you both could understand each other if you both knew the scientific name. Obviously it's a really beautiful thing, that there's so many different common names in so many different languages, and that should really be honoured. But it can be, in some cases, quite handy to know a scientific name, to look it up or whatever. I guess we're also often lucky enough to be able to use the internet if we only know the English name of something, and then it will come up with all the other names and all the other languages that we can think of. I don't know, it's up to you if you want to dive into that world. I think when you're starting to get to know plants, it can feel a bit intimidating because there's so many different ones and they all look kind of alike, and it's really tempting to go by, oh, this is yellow, so it must be, I don't know, this yellow flower, the buttercup. You know, it's like very easy to only look at one detail in a plant, but what you need to get used to is like looking at the smallest sort of details, like how many petals does it have? And we'll get into like how flowers are arranged in a bit, but you know, petals are like the things on flowers that, like these guys, if you have a flower, it's the outside bits, the colourful, often colourful bits. Like, yeah, how are the leaves arranged? So how do they look in the plant? How hairy is it? Is it smooth? Is it spiky? Is it really like easily snappable? Does it have long leaves? Do they have like elaborately detailed leaves? Like, is it kind of frothy in its flowering, or is it quite, you know, just like singular flowers? Like, there's so many ways that you can describe what a plant looks like, and there's all these like botanical terms for it. But yeah, I think as long as you're like really really observing when you're identifying, then that's a really good starting point, you know, and also just for yourself to start getting used to like all the differences in how plants grow. See, like brambles, for example, I can see some around me. They're very creeping, and they're like spiky, and like, you know, they kind of set root in different places, similar to strawberries. They like walk and then they set a new root, and then they walk and they set a new root, and they kind of wander like that. And then there's nettles. They grow really upright and quite high, and they're really like spiky in terms of like hairy, actually, more so, and like fuzzy in a way. And then there's ferns that just are very like, I don't know, there's, you know, those are the ways that I describe plants. Like botanists have all sorts of words for these, like the margin is serrate, I don't know, like brambles have quite serrate margins. I don't know, there's all sorts of ways to describe plants, but just take it one step at a time and really just dive into one plant at a time, really, and then start to see if you can see it around, you know. So just start with the plants that are around you, the flowers that you see semi-regularly, that are quite common, you know, and yeah, it's a really good time, really. So let's explore and identify some flowers together.
Contemplate the life of trees. So long, so long.
Okay, so there are all sorts of different flower ID books that you can use. Wow, look at the ferns. Today I brought my field guide to Wildflowers of Britain by the Reader's Digest Nature Lovers Library. Oh, I already pressed the plant in here. So this book is really lovely, has incredible illustrations that really help the identification of plants. I use this one semi-regularly. It is quite heavy, but it's also very good, especially for beginners. Oops, we identified a little Stitchwort there. Oop, greater Stitchwort, really. So something that you'll find in most plant ID books is some sort of aid to, you know, how to identify or like use the certain book. Like some books are arranged to flower petal colour, some are arranged to families. This one is quite good for beginners, and it also focuses a lot on sort of the folk stories, or dives into the origins of the names of these plants, and that's why I really like it. So here it has little pictures and then little descriptors of the plant that you might have found. So for example, earlier I found this plant here, and I was curious what it was. I already knew what it could have been potentially, or what it might be, but I was just going to try and, you know, identify it as if I didn't know anything about this. So I was just looking at this book, you know, what's sounding kind of like a good match for this. For example, it's definitely not flowers with 4 petals, because it has more than 4 petals, so okay, it wasn't that one. It's not flowers with 5 yellow or white petals, leaves with a straight edge, it doesn't really have that either. In the end, I ended up here because I saw this little drawing, so it was really helpful, where it says flowers with 5 white petals, and I was like, ah, okay, well that's definitely extremely familiar looking. So I went to page 70, and I was like, oh, okay, so these are called pinks apparently in their family. In this book they call them the pinks. And yeah, I went through the book, and I was like, oh, okay, this looks really familiar. So then I ended up here, and first I thought, okay, field mouse ear doesn't look quite right because it's not hairy, you know, so it can't be that one. So I continued onto the next page, and then I found this plant called Greater Stitchwort, and then there's also Lesser Stitchwort. And then I started reading about it. It says here, a straggly plant with angled stems. The shorter stems are flowerless, and the longer stems bear white flowers. It often uses other plants, such as grasses, for support. The leaves are stalkless, narrow, and long-pointed. It flowers from April to June. In common with many shade-loving plants, Greater Stitchwort does not last long once it has been picked. Furthermore, the stems of this attractive hedgerow flower are very weak. Yes, and they are very weak. They bend quite easily, needing the support of surrounding vegetation to reach any height, and snap easily at the point where the leaves are attached. And then I tried that. Yep. So I just found a plant that is definitely in the same family as the Greater Stitchwort, and I think you can see how similar they are. Both of them are in the family of the pinks, also known as the carnation family or Caryophyllaceae family. This plant, it's a Red Campion. The petals are deeply divided and they have an inner ring of white flaps. I don't know if you can see, but the middle bit, the inner ring, is white. And a bit higher up there. It's quite fuzzy, and it's hairy, I guess. It says here, abundant in most areas of Britain, usually found on rich soils, at the edges of woods or in hedgerows.
Foraging for food and medicinal herbs. Getting home late, keeping cooking simple, as we will be waking up early for planting, weather permitting.
I have no idea what this is, so I'm gonna find out. So this is a figwort. When you look at the flowers, you can see they look pretty similar to yellow rattle, for example, like this. What other figworts are there? There's this one plant called figwort in general. This plant also has a similar type of flower. Eye brights. So basically, yeah, that type of shape of flower is what this plant has. And I'm not entirely sure if it is actually cow wheat, but it looks like it could be. It looks pretty similar. Maybe it's like a smaller version of it. Yeah, you won't always get every plant in an ID book, so potentially this particular plant isn't in here, but something similar to it is. So I'm going to look in some other ID books when I get home to identify this one.
Eagerly awaiting spring, so are things. All year round, she warms there on the equator. Waiting rain, we'll get our share later. Wake through the night.
So I have picked a few different flowers this time, and I'm also using a different book just to kind of, show that each book is different, but in some ways also similar, to identify these 3 plants. So let's dive into this book. This is actually one of my favourite guides, along with the one that I showed you before. Oh, nice little dried plants. And it very much has a similar sort of introduction in the first few pages. And it also describes how to identify wildflowers. You kind of get a basic understanding of how a flower is arranged, or what parts most flowers will have. So this is a buttercup, which is really this plant, and it's cut in half in the illustration. But yeah, basically all the parts of this illustration you can see in here. So these are the petals, the yellow things on the outside. Sepals are the green bits at the bottom. And then you've got the stamen, which are these little yellow bits. And then the green thing in the middle, that's the ovary in there. Yeah, that's already finished flowering. So it has been fertilized. And you can see that the ovary, or the ovaries actually, has multiple. They are all starting to turn to seed now. So to identify this one here, I know what this is, I just want to kind of get to finding out what this is as if I didn't know what this is. So looking at it, it's got really nice umbelliferous flowers, so they're in umbels. Like, there's all sorts of little flowers that make one big umbrella almost. And then if I go to the key of this particular book, and I read all the bits and I see what is most relevant in terms of this plant. So I find here, flowers in broad, flat, topped or umbrella shaped clusters, number 7. And then it says a few examples, and if you don't know any of these, that's fine. I think I found the plant that I'm looking for. These are the umbel plants. Look, they've got like these little umbrellas, and they're all so similar. La 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 la. Wow, they all have very similar heads. So looking at this, I'm like, whoa, that's confusing. They all look so similar. But if you look at one page in depth, you'll see certain things. For example, what the seed pod will look like, or what the leaves look like. You just have to really, really compare all of these different ones and dive into the little details of them. For example, this one here, hemlock, it's got the little purple patches. Ta-da! And then this one here has got a very different type of seed pod, very different leaves, and also it grows in a very different type of environment. So it likes watery areas. And then this one here has got hairs, and this one doesn't have hairs. This one's yellow flowered. This one has a red dot in the middle, and the flowers die back like this, which it also doesn't do. So when you're diving into the identification of one plant, you really want to look at all the things that are different from the ones that look similar. Sweet Cicely, for example, Myrrhis odorata, this one smells really sweet, kind of like licorice. This one doesn't really do that. So that's why I can conclude that it's Cow Parsley and not Sweet Cicely. So a lot of plant identification actually turns out to be ruling things out almost. So yeah, this is Anthriscus sylvestris, Cow Parsley, and it grows a lot of places. Let's try and identify this one. I know I already said that this is a buttercup, but yeah, I particularly enjoyed this book because it has nice little images of specific types of flowers. So this thing here, we just saw that over here. Look, it's a type of geranium. Crane's bill. So let's have a look. So it's not like this one. So it doesn't have the same setup. See, it has one sort of compound bit, another bit, and another bit, and then each bit in itself has these 3 bits, which again have kind of almost 3 bits as well. So it looks a lot more like this, which says here is the creeping buttercup, which is Ranunculus repens, and repens means creeping. Yeah, like the creeping clovers that I mentioned earlier. And then you can see the same Latin name. And then, for example, there's bulbous buttercup, which is bulbosus in the Latin name, which is quite easy to learn because it's really similar. But yeah, this is how you could identify this lovely little buttercup. Let's identify this plant, which is a bit spiky, actually. And I already found a picture of this that might be relevant, but I think it's actually a forget-me-not. However, it does look really similar, so it might be somewhere around here. Aha, well, there we have it. It's very obvious that it is this one. So it is quite similar to a forget-me-not, but it's really, really like spiky, hairy almost. It's Pentaglottis sempervirens, green alkanet. It's really quite common here. There's another species called bugloss, which is similar to this apparently, which I don't really know, but it's also in the same family as borage. It's very hairy, fluffy. And it says here bristly, broad leaves, long stalks, and the petals, here we can see, are joint. And the way you can see that is, often with petals, you can take them off one by one. See, if I have this one, I can take one petal off. But with this plant, here, you can see perfectly they're all attached to one another because they don't come off one by one. So joined petals is an identifying feature of this plant, which is super handy to know. Yeah, I hope that was helpful in some way. So, just to discuss a few more ways that you can get used to learning plant names. I think just interacting with as many plants as you can. This doesn't have to be or have to look like, you going out on a big journey to the woods, unless that's something that's accessible to you and you want to do that. It can also look like you walking to work or to school or wherever it is you need to go, and just paying attention to the things around you, maybe picking things around you. Like right now, I'm sitting next to some lady's mantle, and if I didn't know what this were, if I had the time, I would like to take it home. Maybe I would press it between some books, like between the pages of a book, or maybe I would take a picture of it if I didn't want to pick it, and I wasn't sure if maybe it's a rare plant, I don't know. Yeah, there are ways that, you know, I can take the memory of this plant with me, and then I can dig into kind of what this plant may look like once I have the time. I'm not always carrying like a flower ID guide on me. I used to, but I don't anymore. At least not at all times. But yeah, I can also use plant identification apps on my phone. There's one called PlantNet, which actually is pretty good. I used to be like don't use phone apps because they're super confusing and they don't really help you. And with some things, they're definitely not that helpful, but they can be helpful in terms of like guiding you into the right direction of what family a plant is in, like the Buttercup family, or is it the like, you know, the compound sort of umbelliferous heads. Yeah, and I think it's really important that you just make it a sort of like day-to-day practice almost, you know. It's like something that you get used to in your everyday life, and that's how I learned a lot of plants. And it's also, sometimes it's totally okay, you know, not to know at all what you're looking at, because it happens to me all the time, and it especially happened to me when I started identifying flowers as a kid. I was just like, I don't know what this is, I don't know if it looks like anything else. Like, I had no idea about all these families or ways that plants are related. So I would just sit for ages and like look through the pages of a book, you know. I would really like go through every single page and be like, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? And I would just like look at the pictures for so long. And then sometimes when I would come across a plant, say going for a walk or something, I'd be like, oh my god, I've seen that somewhere. And then I'd remember like, somewhere in my book, like I saw a picture of this plant, you know. So it can also be the other way around, that you like actually dive into identification guides and then you come across these things, and there's like a connection made in your head, you know. It's like, whoa, I remember seeing this somewhere. So whatever works for you, just try and like experiment in different ways and get used to learning plants' names. For me, it always just helps to get like really curious, as in like, who is this, like who's sitting with me, and like who am I sitting with, and just taking them home, putting them in some water and like drying them. There's all sorts of ways to interact with them, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it was helpful in some way. It's just kind of supposed to be an introduction to get you used to how to work with identifying plants, and I hope you learned a little bit in some way. Give me some feedback, let me know what you'd like to see more of. I can go into more depth, say for example like flower arrangements, or like parts of different flowers and like different leaf shapes or something, but only if that's something you're interested in. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.